Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, how you doing, everybody? It is Friday, February 1st. Happy February. February 1st, 2019, and, well, it's time for another show, regardless of whether we're ready or not. Schools are closed here again, which is incredible, and if anybody, I can't tell you what the snow total is here, or people who live in areas where it really snows will just be angry and annoyed that my kid's school is closed for 3 days in a row. I don't know if I'm angry and annoyed. It doesn't make that much difference. It's much better than delayed opening. I must admit that. I'd rather have them just stay home and I don't have to scoot them out the door in the middle of breaks. But that's where we are. It's closed for temperatures again, although it is snowing once again. We just didn't get a great deal of accumulation here. I've never seen, it's been a long time, I guess, since schools were closed for so long, strictly really from cold. We just didn't get enough snow. I don't know. Maybe they don't want to run the buses in the snow. Anyway, it's very cold where we are and probably where you are too. And it's going to stay cold through the day and then it warms up. Next week, I think we're expecting temperatures near the 60s for much of the week. And then, of course, by the time, like I said yesterday, you get to use your time off on the weekend, it will plummet back down to not quite this cold, but pretty cold once again. Just to tease you, I guess. So if you can work outside during the warmer weather, good luck to you. I hope you get a chance to do that. Daily Coast Radio is ready to go. We are live now. And let's see what Bill tells me I'm going to do here. Kagro X bids you a happy TGIF. Yes, that's true. And Cadet Bone Spurs a happy flight down to Pervalago. Might as well wish him a happy flight, I suppose. It doesn't make any difference. No skin off my nose if he has a good time on the flight down there, although I did pay for the flight down there. That kind of sucks. All right, screw you. Hope you have a terrible flight. All right. I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with that. But yeah, government is temporarily back open. It's the weekend. Nothing's settled, but the government's open and it's the weekend. So I'm guessing that it's time for him to head down to his cloistered palace down in Florida. All indications are that by this afternoon he will be winging his way down there. And wow, I mean, what a situation we're in. As usual, you know, nothing resolved. We're open for business on the government side for about 2 weeks here. President is out there grousing and complaining, tweeting, speaking, giving interviews, insisting that wall talks are a waste of time. And they are, insofar as they are about building a wall. The Congress is not interested in funding that happening. And you're going to have to find some sort of language somewhere that Congress will insist means it can't be used for a wall, and Donald Trump and his pals will insist that they're going to use it for a wall anyway, through some combination of mechanisms, whether simply grabbing the money or ordering the military to do it or declaring a national emergency or pretending he doesn't understand how funds can be reprogrammed and how they can't. I see early this morning the story from, let's see, I'll scroll back. Media Matters or Think Progress? Think Progress, I think it was, just tweeting out a story that, not terribly surprising or intriguing. Rick Scott from Florida insisting that the wall should be built using executive orders, although they say using illegal executive orders. I bet that he says something different. The executive orders may turn out to be illegal. They may be absolutely right over there, but Rick Scott probably doesn't think so. But he's an idiot, so don't take any, advice from him. Let's see. Oh, grab that one. Josh Israel writing for Think Progress. The headline again says it all. Rick Scott wants Trump to bypass Congress for a wall and DACA using illegal executive orders. All right. Got to straighten that out. What are the illegal executive orders for exactly? Okay, it's DACA, not a wall. Got to turn off the auto-playing video. You even get auto-playing video ads over at Think Progress. I don't think that's progress. Let me just say that right now. All right. So, I mean, do we... I probably will want to catch up at some point on what this supposed solution for the DACA program actually is, because I've lost track of how they're handling that one. Let's see. Senator Rick Scott has been in office only since January 8th, and he's already given up on Washington, D.C. Oh, how do you like that? Yeah, that's true. How do you like that? For senators to say, yeah, bypass Congress. I think the founders would have had no problem with that one. Having decided based on his many days of experience that compromise is impossible, he proclaimed on Thursday that President Donald Trump should simply ignore Congress and unilaterally act, not just to build his vaunted wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, but also to permanently protect young undocumented immigrants who were protected under President Barack Obama's Deferred Action Program and other immigrants with temporary protected status. At least he wants to make it permanent. Unfortunately for Scott, a prominent Republican lawmaker delivered an impassioned argument in 2013 for why President of the United States, the President, does not have the authority to include a permanent solution for DACA and TPS in an executive order. And it was Rick Scott in a veto memorandum that he authored while governor of Florida. Scott tweeted a statement on Thursday afternoon urging Trump to stop trying to negotiate with congressional Democrats and instead take unprecedented executive action to illegally solve the immigration debate. Washington is far beyond broken. It's full of actors who just want to play politics, like me. The former Florida governor opined, should the other party continue to refuse to work with him, then the president needs to use his emergency powers to fund border security and include a permanent solution for DACA and TPS. All right. Well, he's not actually interested in doing that. Just he should, because I say so. This is, of course, illegal. Let's get to that part. While some conservative legal scholars have embraced the notion that Trump can just declare an emergency and spend billions of taxpayer dollars to build the wall he vowed would be fully funded by Mexico, many others on the left and the right dispute this. With a Trump-friendly judiciary, it is possible he could get away with such a power grab nonetheless. Do you remember that? That's one of the most disappointing results of this whole stupid experiment, is that you don't have to think things through anymore and come up with a logical reason built on precedent as to why the president can do whatever it is he's asserting he can do. You can just simply say, well, I don't know, 5 people have MAGA hats, so there you go. That's the whole basis of our judiciary system now. Good job. No credible experts on the left or the right have ever suggested that a president has the unilateral power to institute permanent protections for non-citizens without going through Congress first. Many congressional Republicans even questioned whether the Obama administration had the power to grant them temporary protected status, but that relied on his executive power to exercise prosecutorial discretion. This point was made in 2013 by then-Governor of Florida, Rick Scott, of course. In a veto memorandum, he lambasted and do people say lambasted for that? I've heard that. And it does make more sense, doesn't it, than basted, like basting a lamb. That's not really what this is about, right? The Obama administration for creating DACA at all and argued that it could not and did not create a new legal status. Deferred action is simply a policy of the Obama administration absent congressional direction designed to dictate removal action by DHS agency discretion. It was never passed by Congress, nor is it a promulgated rule. Scott made a similar argument in 2017, saying in a statement that Obama was wrong to address the Dreamer issue by executive order. He should have done it in conjunction with Congress, which is how we make laws in our democracy. Even in his own statement on Thursday, he seemingly questioned his own logic, saying, I know there will be critics that say the president shouldn't do things like this by executive order, and they aren't necessarily wrong. You should just go ahead and do it anyway. Scott, who was governor, frequently ignored the law in his effort to suppress voters, claims to support a permanent protection for Dreamers brought to the United States as children, and has said that these kids must be allowed to pursue the American dream. They must be. He says so. But rather than demanding his colleagues in the Senate Republican majority work with the House to enact one of the many stalled bills that would do just that, he instead is calling for the president to ignore constitutional process and act in a way that would likely be struck down by the courts, a move that would offer the DACA beneficiaries no real protection at all. So, I didn't think I was going to start with Rick Scott's story, but as it turns out, I did. And I guess there's probably very little that you can do about it now. However, if you wanted to, I suppose you could download and then edit it out of the podcast. If you think you can make that work smoothly, give me a call. If I had any money, I'd hire you as an editor. Okay, let's see. We'll move on. There are plenty of other things to catch up on, obviously. Why don't we start with this one? I didn't think I was going to start with Rick Scott. This a bit more my speed for a Friday, and particularly from Esquire magazine, and not from Charles Pierce, but Jack Holmes, who grabbed attention with this headline today. Just thought I'd share the piece. The Great American Heist. That sounds like something we should do something about, doesn't it? Wait a minute. It just occurred to me. I am looking at you guessed it, the AMP version of the story, and I'm going to start reading, copyright notices as part of the text if I don't get the real deal in front of me here. All right, let's see. I think I got it. All right. The Great American Heist. A new cabinet has coalesced around Donald Trump entering year 3 of his presidency, one that seems poised to pull the United States further and more efficiently, that's good, towards kleptocracy, which is a bad thing to be pulled towards efficiently or otherwise. Okay, that's our subheader here. Top graphic prominently featuring Jared, Ivanka, and Wilbur Ross, along with dotard Trump. And here, let's set the stage. A defense contractor running the Department of Defense, a self-styled tycoon who allegedly stole $120 million from his business partners. I think that's Wilbur Ross. A coal lobbyist regulating coal, obviously. A senior Commerce Department official, not Wilbur Ross, but someone less senior than that, who once lobbied for whale hunters. These are all bad people. And then finally, one-word sentence, Ivanka. That's a gut punch. All right. Donald Trump's improbable ascension to the American presidency was a bat signal. You didn't think I was going to say signal after that. It was a bat signal to some of the most accomplished grifters and scoundrels this fine country has to offer. They jumped on the nearest airplane, preferably private and paid for by someone else, and jetted off to Washington, D.C. to carve out their piece of the action. The United States and its territories have always been home to some of history's greatest scammers, fraudsters, confidence men, and snake oil salesmen. It is a relentless feature of the national character in a country built by people trying to make a buck however they could on the ragged edge of civilization. It's just the very greasiest operators don't often pry their way into the cabinet of the United States president. More rarely still do they capture it and the executive branch of government. This is the Teapot Dome scandal on steroids. Everyone loves the on steroids metaphor. Douglas Brinkley, a professor of history at Rice University and a CNN contributor, told me he's referring to the orgy of bribery, don't tell Roger Stone about it, and crony capitalism that devoured the presidency of Warren G. Harding. Yes, in the 1920s. Harding's crew, known as the Ohio Gang, featured oil industry insiders who proceeded to operate in public office on behalf of their old friends in the business. For Brinkley, the 45th president has a similar recruiting strategy. Seems to be the case. Donald Trump understands people that are greedy. He said he does understand them. When he's dealing with the public lands and the environment, he wants people that are into making cash out of resources, not preservation. He doesn't trust preservation. It's because they have ethics. He trusts people who see that there's gold in them there hills. And it seems he's found them. As we embark on the third year of the Trump era, a new group has filtered in to populate the most senior levels of his government. The class of 2019 is different in kind to the right-wing oddballs and ravenous feeders at the public trough that went barreling into the administration in January of 2017. Often those characters flamed out early, and now they've been replaced. The folks taking their place are the operators, the Beltway veterans with deep ties to the industries they are now tasked with regulating. They have been in government, then out of it, and now they're back in. They know what the people who write the big checks want, and they know how to make it happen. They also know the rules you just can't break, and have the patience and discipline to mostly stay out of the headlines until it's time to eat. Many key departments of the executive branch are now run by cutouts of the industries they're tasked with regulating and have set out to redraw the rules to suit the interests of their former and likely future employers. In effect, they are tasked with destroying these departments. First up, I guess, Mr. Cole, Andrew Wheeler at the EPA. He's currently EPA acting administrator. Unlike Pruitt, it says here, let's see, we are in the right format here. It's sort of an interesting break, and the way they delineate their break is odd. Unlike Pruitt, you remember him, right? Mr. Wheeler tends to eschew the limelight, the New York Times reported. His career was built around quietly and incrementally, he's an incrementalist, I knew it, quietly and incrementally advancing the interests of the fossil fuel industry, chiefly by weakening or delaying federal regulations. Many believe he'll be more effective than Pruitt, who himself rolled back dozens of environmental rules in his relatively short tenure. Wheeler certainly was productive in private practice. Shortly before he was confirmed as the number 2 at EPA in 2017, he successfully lobbied the Department of Interior to shrink the size of, remember this, Bears Ears National Park. Why it doesn't say park in the text here, I do not know. But I'll add that. For whatever reason, the editors missed that one. Let's see. Take Andrew Wheeler. That's interesting. I think what happened here is that the formatting, now I told you that the formatting looked weird, and I'm not in the AMP version of it. I'd probably be better off in AMP. Maybe I've been too hard on AMP, and here Esquire itself has all of the text screwed up. I told you that there was a weird transition to, unlike Pruitt, Mr. Wheeler tends to. And down beneath it is the big paragraph header with the gigantic letter T on the word take. Take Andrew Wheeler. That clearly should have been the text first. I don't know why it's not. I don't know why the word park is missing from Bears Ears National, or the phrase. All right, so we'll start over. Take Andrew Wheeler, the acting APA administrator who succeeded Scott Pruitt after he was run off the mountain by an avalanche of scandal. Wheeler worked for Senator James Inhofe, the brilliant mind who brought a snowball to the Senate floor to disprove the existence of climate change. According to the New York Times, the senator's many protégés, a group that also includes Pruitt, are loosely known as the Inhofe Mafia. More mafia. There's certainly a lot of it. That's a small operator in the mafia, though. They tend to favor radical deregulation to match the prerogatives of industry and dispute the scientific consensus on climate change. Wheeler then moved to EPA under President George W. Bush, and then he went to Collect, lobbying for coal giant Murray Energy, which paid his firm hundreds of thousands of dollars annually from 2009 to 2017. And now, ready? This is really great. This is some great formatting. Can I just fire everybody at Esquire right now? Because the next text that appears on my screen is monument on behalf of a client. Energy Fuels Resources, which sought to exploit uranium deposits there. Where? Bears Ears National Monument rather than Park. Nobody sees this? I guess I do. All right. Well, didn't strike anybody at Esquire to change this. So there you go. Shortly before Wheeler was confirmed as the number 2 in EPA, he successfully lobbied Interior to shrink the size of Bears Ears National Monument on behalf of Energy Fuels Resources, which sought to exploit uranium deposits there. Should I even continue with this article? Is there any hope that the rest of it is going to be formatted correctly? Should I just skip it? I mean, maybe I'm starting to think I should give up on it. But I'll run through the names anyway and give you basics on who else joins Wheeler in all of this. Speaking of Interior, there's a new sheriff in town now that Ryan Zinke's been put out to pasture. The other department, chiefly concerned with safeguarding the American continent's natural wonders, is now headed by David Bernhardt. The new acting secretary had so many conflicts of interest when he took his first job as Zinke's number 2. They had to carry around a card listing all of them. I don't know what that was supposed to do for didn't stop him. Do we want to know about Bernhardt. Well, let's see, who else is listed in this? Patrick Shanahan at the Pentagon. And let's see, Donald Trump himself. Gee whiz, I think we know enough about him. I'm curious to see what else is out and around about here. And I know we have, there's more on Price, Zinke, and Pruitt. And Betsy DeVos is in here. Alex Azar, who they list as Dr. Insulin. Interesting. There's Wilbur Ross, the Monopoly man. This is a long article. I'd never get through it anyway. Mnuchin gets a picture. There's Matt Whitaker. He gets a photo. Jared Kushner in there. Boy, it would take forever to get through this. Ivanka Trump. Well, I'm sure it's a wonderful piece. And I was intrigued by the headline and the subheader, but the editing has just done me in here. I can't sit here and try to reformat their article for them on the fly. So I'll recommend it to you if you've got some time for the weekend. There are probably some good nuggets to be mined out of these folks on these folks from this piece. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I have a notice here. Here, Justice, I'll pass this one on for you. I don't know what it would be, though. Jack Ox reports having some difficulty making Netroots Radio work today on your phone, huh? Not certain what would be causing that, but if anybody else is listening over the Netroots Radio live stream on their phone, you could chime in on the KITM hashtag and let us know whether it's working for. Obviously, it would be working for you if you were listening, and we'll just have her go out and get a new phone. Why don't you just go do that? Every time something goes wrong, just replace it. Nothing's repairable in this world anymore. Anyway, I don't know. You're probably looking for an excuse to get a new phone. Not that you're ready to drop another $500 for a phone today. Sorry to hear that. I assume the stream is working fine. Maybe you can pick it up on laptop or desktop. But we'll have the podcast ready for you later on. I'm saying this now as though she was listening, which she isn't because it's not working on her phone. All right, somebody go on over to her house and let her know that we'll have the podcast for her later. I think she's probably aware of that. Okay, let's see. Should I head down the path of the breaking news about the United States announcing that it is going to withdraw from the intermediate range nuclear missile treaty with Russia? I don't know anything. I don't have anything about that one, but I really should probably look it up in the morning's headlines. I saw it last night and I didn't grab it because it's been floated before, right? It's not actually brand new news, but I guess the fact that we're finally going ahead with it is the news of the morning. Auto-playing video. This from CNN's report, although they just provide me the video and no write-up of it. The headline says, Secretary Pompeo calls out Russia for shamelessly violating this INF treaty. But I think I'm going to need a written piece on this one. Let's see if we can move back to their written piece on it from a couple hours ago. U.S. expected to announce U.S. suspension of landmark INF arms control treaty. Let's see. Nicole Gouette, G-A-O-U-E-T-T-E, and Kylie Atwood did this piece for CNN. We'll pause their annoying video and take a look at the piece here. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is expected to announce Friday, and I guess he's doing that now, that the U.S. will suspend participation in an arms control treaty with Russia that has been a centerpiece of European security since the Cold War. So who could possibly care about that? According to two U.S. officials and multiple diplomatic sources familiar with the matter. President Donald Trump and his senior officials have been signaling for months, I knew he was, that they are ready to pull out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which the U.S. and Europe accuse Moscow of violating since 2014. All right, interesting. The suspension raises concerns about a renewed arms race with Moscow and has put European allies on edge. It starts a 180-day clock to complete withdrawal unless Russia returns to compliance with the 1987 agreement. And there may be a germ of sense somewhere in all of this. If the Russians are, in fact, in obvious violation of the agreement, there's no real reason why the United States should abide by it either. It's just, you would hope to have a real president with a real foreign policy team and a real Pentagon team in place for this moment in time. And, it may be that this moment in time is the time that the Russians have chosen to exploit this the furthest because we don't have a competent president in place. But it's hard to see how escalating tensions on a nuclear level really helps anybody, except that, they probably believe that they could. So I don't know. I don't know whether they feel like they could really pull something on a nuclear level with Donald Trump in office or not. I'll continue with the article. The ground-based nuclear-tipped cruise missiles covered by the bilateral treaty can fly between 310 and 3,100 miles. So it can go anywhere from 310 to 10 times that distance, making them a threat to Europe, where officials are urging the U.S. and Russia to continue talks, even as they consider their next steps, and admit having little to no optimism that the treaty can be saved. I would like to know a little bit more about the alleged Russian violation here, but I don't know whether that's going to be delivered in this piece or not. Time for us to, we're a little bit behind on our music already. Things are falling apart here, not just in Europe. Earlier this month, Under Secretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Andrea Thompson said Russia had until February 2nd to comply, and if they're not in compliance, the U.S. will suspend its obligations to the treaty. I'm just not sure what it is that puts them out of compliance, so we'll see if we can figure that out during the break and report back to you after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. That is, if you can pick up Netroots Radio on your phone today. I'm so upset to hear about that. But okay, well, we've got at least one report from, we'll have to click to Adkaratic. Adkaratic, do we have that? Are we pronouncing it correctly for you? Who reports listening to you on my Netroots Radio via TuneIn on my phone right now. Okay, well, so it's working for at least some people, and maybe it depends on the app, maybe something else, maybe your phone. Maybe your phone's out of power. Have you tried turning it off and turning it back on again? I don't know. I guess not, because at this point I probably would have turned it off, and why would I turn it back on again? All right, well, let's continue with turning off the INF treaty and maybe turning that back on again at some point in the future. It doesn't say in this article, as far as I can tell, exactly what it is that we charge that the Russians have been out of compliance with, and I'm sure that's well known to those who have been following the subject for some time, but they didn't feel, for the first time, they don't feel like it's necessary to add that superfluous information. They keep reminding us every time I read these articles that Robert S. Mueller III is special counsel to investigate the allegations of Russian interference in the United States of America's presidential elections during the year 2016. That they always have time to include. What has Russia done? I don't know. But I guess I guess we could probably surmise that, well, they've been building and making operational short-range or intermediate-range nuclear forces in, I don't know, in Western Russia and, perhaps trying to get Ukraine to deploy them as well. I have no idea. All right, well, let's continue on just with the assumption that, this is amazing, the assumption that Mike Pompeo is telling the truth. Okay, just for sake of argument here. Let's see. Where were we? All right, Andrea Thompson, the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control, had said that the Russians had until February 2nd to comply. That's tomorrow, so I'm guessing it's not in the cards. On Thursday, Thompson met with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov. Let me see if I got that right. Ryabkov in Beijing. And Ryabkov said there was no progress on the talks on the issue, according to Russian state media outlet TASS. Not a lot of progress for the Trump administration in any talks so far, are they? Are there? Unfortunately, there is no progress. The U.S. position remains rather tough and ultimatum-like. Oh, that looks good to Trump. He likes the idea of that one. That was according to Ryabkov. We told the U.S. side that it is impossible to hold dialogue in the conditions of attempted blackmailing of Russia, he added. Dang. All right, next section, everything more dangerous. That sounds bad, but I guess we better catch up on it. Washington's departure from the agreement will make everything more dangerous. Former Senator Sam Nunn, co-chairman of the Nuclear Threat Initiative, told CNN. Nunn and other analysts point to the possibility that the U.S. will move to put missile systems in Europe to defend against Russia, raising the possibility of direct confrontation or even tragic accidents. Russia is likely to use the U.S. withdrawal as an excuse to deploy systems elsewhere, many analysts said, possibly unleashing an arms race of previously prohibited weapons systems. That's possible, I guess. I guess the next question is, how many European allies will still currently be willing to negotiate with the Trump-led United States of America for deployment of intermediate-range nuclear forces there? And I think the answer could be close to zero, though it's possible that, I'm curious to see whether that's more likely in, wow. Think about it. Does Germany, for instance, does Angela Merkel's Germany negotiate the deployment of intermediate-range missiles, U.S. missiles under Trump's command there? And do they, on the one hand, they would say, I'm not negotiating with Trump about anything, and we don't want nuclear weapons under his control anywhere near us. On the other hand, they may say, well, if, for instance, he grows too cozy with Putin and threatens to leave NATO, the possibility of a renewed Russian threat is raised, and we need some sort of ultimate nuclear defense. But on the other hand, it's not like they'd be able to launch them on their own. They'd be under U.S. command, I assume, and likely of no use whatsoever in that situation. So I don't know. I don't know whether this really results in a renewed European intermediate-range nuclear forces arms race or not, unless the deployment is into places like Hungary, where they've come under a new right-wing nationalist government, which might find itself in alliance with the various players to the international crime syndicate in Russia and the United States. But who would you then be defending against is the next question. In what direction would those missiles be targeted? So it's very difficult for me to envision a renewed arms race as a result of this, which is sort of a backhanded way of, I guess the Trump administration would use as a backhanded way of validating the move, but it doesn't work because, of course, we're withdrawing from this treaty because of Russian violations. It's difficult to decipher here exactly who's doing what and for what reason. We may have to fall back on yesterday's analysis of Russia and its so-called government and U.S.-Russian relations in the context of mafia family relations instead. But I don't know if that helps describe what's happening here any more clearly. You would think, though, that kleptocrats would simply want to leave well enough alone. Why concern yourself with dealing with intermediate range nuclear weapons when there's not much? I mean, I assume there's just not much that's worth it to them, unless I don't know what it is. Deploying in the course of deployment of a new missile technology, they can sell some to bad actors elsewhere. Maybe that's probably the greatest danger of all this, right? I mean, would you trust either the Putin government or the Trump government to safely and securely and honestly deploy nuclear weapons in anywhere, for one thing, and for another, into the current European theater? I don't know. I can't feel good about that for a number of reasons. Even if they did it honestly and competently, I wouldn't feel good about it, because it would be a danger of nuclear war in Europe and elsewhere. And I certainly don't feel confident about or comfortable with the idea that they're doing it corruptly either, because who knows what comes of that. There's no good outcome from this. Europe, the article continues, is worried about U.S. withdrawal, in particular because it takes the pressure off of Russia and would probably allow Russia to develop and deploy even more of these types of weapons, which threaten, fundamentally, Europeans rather than Americans, noted Jeff Rathke, president of the American Institute for Contemporary German Studies at the Johns Hopkins University. Another 35 minutes spent on the guy's title here. Okay, the prospect of the INF Treaty's dissolution was one factor in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists' January 24th decision to keep its iconic doomsday clock at 2 minutes to midnight, as close to the symbolic point of annihilation as it has been since 1953 at the height of the Cold War. We are heading into a direction we have not been in 40 years. No arms control limits or rules that we are both following, and that is very dangerous, said Lynn Ruston, a senior director for arms control and non-proliferation at the National Security Council during the Obama administration, who is now a vice president at the Nuclear Threat Initiative. U.S. officials and lawmakers have expressed concern that the treaty is allowing China to gain a military advantage. Interesting. As Beijing is not bound by the INF Treaty's limits on intermediate-range missiles that currently constrain the U.S. The history of the arms race has been one side trying to get advantage over the other, and it never works, Rustin said. Neither we nor the Allies are more secure as a result. One use would be devastating, and it is a huge amount of money on top of it. Oh yeah, how are we going to pay for it? Right, that's a good question. For now, both Washington and Moscow have dug in their heels. Thompson, who has been leading talks with the Russians, left her counterparts a letter when the final round of talks ended earlier this month. She told reporters that it detailed what the Russians have to do to return to compliance. All right, now I guess this is a backhanded way of finding out what has the violation been. Scrap the entire missile system they are developing. All right, I guess that's the answer. They are developing a missile system. I mean, that would be a pretty blatant violation, I guess, of the INF. If you're not supposed to develop them and they're doing that, then I suppose we have a problem. All right, next section, destroy the system. Sounds interesting. The only way you can get the system back into compliance is to destroy the system. Thompson told reporters last week, destroy the missile. There, it makes more sense. There's no way to alter it. There's no way to change it. There's no way to adjust the fuel cycle. The U.S. had set a February 2nd deadline for Russia. We heard about that. To return to compliance with the treaty. Last week, Thompson said she would only come back to the table if Russians indicated they were ready to take action. I've told the ambassador here I've told the deputy foreign minister rather, if and when it is appropriate and they have tangible next steps, I am willing to talk, Thompson explained to reporters. But to come to the table and hear the same storyline for the last 5 years isn't productive use of our time, Thompson said, referring to what the U.S. calls Russia's violations of the treaty since 2014. Russia's deputy foreign minister, Sergei Ryabkov, which I feel like we already introduced him into this. No one's editing our nation's newspapers, ladies and gentlemen. I cannot figure this out. Well, anyway, Ryabkov insisted to CNN's Fred Platkin on January 25th that the ball is on the U.S.'s side, not on our side. So I can't even agree on how is it on our side. Are we developing this system? We're not. You are. So how is it on our side? I don't know. Russians just say that. Ryabkov said that Russia fully expects the U.S. to suspend its involvement in the treaty on February 2nd. Except we tricked you. We did it a day earlier. At which point, he said the treaty will be null and void from a judicial point of view and the point of international law. The prospects are quite worrying for Europe and the governments there, where officials emphasized their unified support of the U.S. position that Russia has been violating the treaty. They said they expressed deep concern about what the U.S. decision will mean. You know what's interesting about this? Have we had statements from the president about what's happening here? Because it occurs to me it's the sort of thing I'd be interested in hearing, sort of. And it might be of some interest to Trump, who's continually insisting that he's being tough on the Russians, to issue some tough talk here on this. And maybe I've missed it or dismissed it out of hand as being ridiculous and, play acting, which is probably what I will do with it when I finally do hear about it. I can be honest with you about that. But what would be Trump's position here? Because it's very interesting to view in light of what's going on with the North Koreans, who keep apparently getting caught deploying and developing new missile systems, and Trump simply insists that they're not doing that. The Russians are doing this, but it would be in his interest as Putin's puppet to say that they're not, I guess, or to say, I talked to Putin about it and he says they're not doing this, but they're quite honest, I guess, about the fact that they're doing it, although they keep saying that the ball's in our court, so maybe they're not that honest about it. I'm not certain where Trump is on this, and I'm not certain I definitely want to know. It's just that you'd think that the president would have something to say about this stuff, but I've either missed it or disregarded it to this point, and I don't think I can be criticized too badly for disregarding it if that's the case, because he's a clown and it's not worth listening. I'm just curious of whether he's doing anything at all, saying anything, or whether he's really legit actually, ignoring the whole thing. I really don't know. All right, so where were we? The prospects are quite worrying for Europe governments. That's also an interesting editorial choice. For Europe governments. European governments? Governments in Europe, maybe? No? All right. So they said they expressed deep concern about what the U.S. decision will mean. The bigger picture is what kind of sign you're sending out, what message you're sending, said one European official. For us, this treaty was extremely important for our security. What are we looking at instead if it's scrapped? The official asked, referring to U.S. concerns that China is not bound by the treaty, and that's a legitimate concern. This official said Europeans don't understand why that means dismantling the controls that are in place. Unless, of course, the play is abandon the INF treaty as with the Russians and then negotiate some sort of trilateral treaty that's essentially, why don't you just have China join this treaty, but renegotiate it, in no substantive way, just bring China into it and then announce that Donald Trump is the greatest international arms negotiator in history because he's built this agreement from the ground up where, it really could have been said, in one sentence. P.S. China is also in on this. Thank you. But, And he can name it, after himself, I guess. Maybe that has something to do with it. I'm just guessing. Spitballing, if you will, on this. Let's see. They say that where do we leave off? We want to bring China in. They don't understand why that means dismantling what we have. They say you have to include others in other systems. But still, we don't really want to lose what we have, this official said. We should work on addressing these and other issues while maintaining what we have. Yeah, that would be a normal way of doing it. This official and others in Europe said they've been trying to encourage the U.S. and Russia to engage directly as much as possible. In the meantime, they're girding themselves for the fallout. Which reminds me that we have a nice piece here set aside for later about girding for a fallout here in the United States of a slightly different type, but we'll see if we can get to that in a few minutes, perhaps after the break at the top of the hour. If this kind of treaty gets scrapped, it could have effects on other areas as well, said a second European official. Wow, they found another European official. Who, like others in Europe, pointed to a possible increase in Russian cyber activities, including its influence campaigns and possibility of an arms buildup and the certainty of finger-pointing as Moscow works to assign blame. Russia will feel more legitimized to continue what it's doing now, but also increasing some of its efforts on missile technology and deploying them, said this second official. A third European official, said that they will try to divide NATO. They're going to have help in that one. They'll do anything but stay quiet. The Russians will likely argue that this is about the U.S. and the U.S. trying to destabilize the international order, this official said, stressing that Europe has been united in its stance alongside the U.S., that Russia has been violating the treaty. The Europeans have nothing here to do but to cling tightly to NATO and pretend that they have a strong ally still in the United States thanks to the destabilizing influence of Donald Trump. And the Russians, though, look like the ones with a foot in reality saying it's the U.S. trying to destabilize the international order, because that's easy to believe. Donald Trump is president. What could be simpler to believe about Donald Trump and his regime than that they are trying to destabilize the international order? They keep saying they're trying to, right? That was Bannon's official platform, though at least you could argue he's not in the government anymore. But even if you don't believe that Donald Trump is trying to destabilize the international order, you almost assuredly believe that he's doing so anyway, all by himself and perhaps by accident. As a matter of fact, that brings us to the next section here titled War by Blunder, and who could blunder better than Donald Trump, right? The message sent to Russia is that allies care, not just the U.S., and we have a willingness to coordinate our path forward, the third official said. There will be a cost. That's actually sort of nonsensically expressed. But okay, I get your idea, I think. Europe is grappling now with any number of questions. We have to think about whether adaptation is needed, and that will take time. It says adaption, not adaptation. This whole thing is a real mess, to be honest. Every written piece I've had put in front of me, or I've put in front of myself anyway, has been highly questionable in terms of hanging together editorially. Europe will certainly be looking to make clear that we believe it's important to strengthen other arms control treaties like New START, this official said. We'll be looking for other conversations about stability in Europe, and we'll look for ways to engage with Russia through NATO and bilateral channels. A central question will be how you mitigate risks, this official said. A major question will be how to deal with whatever the U.S. does going forward, particularly if it decides it would like to deploy weapons in Europe. We don't have a clear vision on this, said the second European official. That prospect could be quite dangerous, warned Nunn, when you deploy these intermediate systems in Europe. It is going to cut back on decision times, Nunn explained. When you have short flight time, you have short decision time. If you react to a false warning all of a sudden, you could be in a war by blunder. All right, I guess that's what we're talking about there. And that makes a certain amount of sense. I had almost forgotten that motivator for the INF treaty, that these missiles launch and strike relatively quickly, where the old ICBM fleet gave you all of about half an hour to worry about whether or not you had read the signals right about incoming nuclear weapons from the other side. These intermediate range missiles, although cruise missiles do largely the same thing, and INF doesn't regulate them, but it reduces the amount of time from launch to impact, and therefore the amount of time that both parties, presumably the United States and Russia in this case, would have in confirming that there really had been a launch, so that they felt justified. Not that this really helps matters, whether they felt justified or not. The rest of us blow up regardless, even if they didn't happen to feel particularly justified that day in launching nuclear missiles, but did it anyway. But you get the idea. You only have 5 to 8 minutes to decide whether or not those things on your radar screen are real and that you should launch yours too. It is actually, that's a pretty fascinating way of looking at it when you break it down, right? It's a huge problem. You can see why, if it was your decision to make, whether to launch a retaliatory or what you thought was a retaliatory strike with intermediate range missiles, you could see why, obviously, you'd want to verify 100% that what looks on your radar screen like incoming missiles from the other side really are incoming missiles from the other side. You want to be right about that. But fast forward a couple of minutes, and does anybody even care? I mean, you don't want to launch on a false alarm, obviously, because then, of course, you would be looked at. You would look very bad in the history books at that point. On the other hand, I guess what I'm saying is, are there going to be any history books? And is that real? I mean, obviously, that's not any way to make your decisions. It's just as bad as George W. Bush's, how will history judge us? Who cares? We'll all be dead. Except in this case, we'll really, literally all be dead. And not that he was kidding about us being dead in terms of history, but we'll be dead a lot faster. History will happen a lot sooner, or would have happened a lot sooner had anybody survived to write the thing. I just found it bizarre all of a sudden, for the first time, the idea that, well, I really feel like I have to be right here because I have to be justified in launching this attack. And even if you're right, if you are right and you are justified in doing it, is there anyone left to care? Does anybody care? Would it be viewed in any way? Can you, on the other hand, right? Could it be viewed as a moral act to not launch, even if you are sure that the incoming signals are legitimate, under the, premise that, well, perhaps half of human civilization might survive? Not that I'm certain that it would, even if one side decided not to launch. What do you do with that? Like, you can't even really be judged by the electorate of whichever side is left, depending on whether or not it has an electorate or ever did have an electorate. But I guess in the situation where, all right, we detect Russian launches and we decide it doesn't really matter for us to strike back. What does that really buy anybody? And, the conventional thinking, of course, is, well, you would have to strike back because otherwise you would de-incentivize any restraint by the other side. But, obviously, if you've gotten to this point, restraint on the other side is not something that you should be worried about or interested in, because it's obviously out the window. We're being attacked and they launched first. It's a weird thing. It's not, I guess it's almost beyond human comprehension, which of course makes it a pretty good idea to eliminate the weaponry, because I guess if you're going to have people dithering over whether or not it makes any moral sense to launch a retaliatory strike, then you're going to have people questioning things and saying, well, what if the other side felt that way? If we believe the other side felt that way, then the thing to do, somebody might argue, is to, in fact, strike first and be the winners in this quote-unquote winners in this nuclear exchange. And that itself would be extraordinarily dangerous. It just is a weird thing. I don't recall ever spending any time thinking about this, and I did spend time thinking about this. I really did. I'm not kidding. And those of you who are either as old as I am or somewhat older, may recall, and perhaps younger students don't. Maybe they didn't go through this, but there used to be, that was a political science study topic in college growing up. The nuclear balance of forces and the dynamics, mechanics, morality, etc., governance of a possible nuclear exchange, how it would be managed, who manages the maintenance and hopefully the non-launching of the weaponry now. I don't know whether they bother to study it anymore. I assume so because it still exists, but who knows? But I don't believe we spent any time that I can recall thinking about why does it matter whether the people in charge of ordering a retaliatory strike think they're right or not. Does it make a difference? An esoteric part of the topic. Okay. Well, that covers it. I don't mean to scare anybody here, but it turns out that we are likely to be on the brink of nuclear annihilation all over again. And we made such progress in all of this time running up to today. But if you didn't think the apocalypse was coming, I suppose you might as well get used to the idea starting now. Okay, let's see. What have we here? A comment from Michael Musson before we head into the break. If you are upset with Russia, then add financial sanctions. Leaving a treaty doesn't do anything that Putin cares about. That's probably true. Putin's probably interested in having the treaty scrapped anyway. I don't think that it would have occurred to Donald Trump to exit the treaty all by himself. So I suppose he's behind it in some way, shape, or form. Financial sanctions would likely be better. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. As I mentioned on our way out of the INF treaty piece and into the break a few minutes ago, I did have something else that I've been hanging on to, which Eric Posman has contributed to us for his first audio essay of 2019. And maybe now's the time to bring this up. I was reminded of it by one of the titles of the, or subtitles, I guess, of the section of the INF treaty piece that we were just looking at here. What was it? Girding for the fallout. Different idea there. But what about, this is an interesting premise that he's presenting to us. What about what happens after Trump? However we get there, right? And here's this little brief note that he sent to me here about this, his first essay of 2019. Trump's demise seems inevitable, does it? It feels like it should be, but I don't know. Not holding my breath, I guess. But it does seem inevitable. How do we deal with the aftershock? That is a good question. I don't think we've given any thought to it because I guess once we get to that time, I guess a little bit like this nuclear exchange, this is now so dangerous. Who cares? But that's going to be an issue. There are going to be people left behind, essentially, people who are resistors to this idea of terminating the Trump presidency. However it's terminated, even if it's terminated by natural causes. He's voted out of office in 2020. There's going to be a Fedayeen Donald left behind fighting this battle, and I guess we ought to think about it. So luckily, that's a head scratcher. You don't have to do that. You can just stroke your chin and listen along as Eric Posman does the head scratching for you.
Good morning, Kagro. It's Eric in Orlando. Happy New Year and Happy New Congress. It looks like 2019 promises to be just as chaotic, but possibly cinematic as well, as the curious case of the accidental presidency can hopefully be wrapped up. After all, 2018 was such a sprawling ball of chaos, it's hard to nail down any single theme. But I keep coming back to one article. It was Adam Davidson's April New Yorker column titled Michael Cohen and the End Stage of the Trump Presidency. The premise is that once Michael Cohen got raided, it would only be a matter of time before we all found out what a shoddy, grifty, and two-bit criminal racket the Trump organization really is. After the crimes, and more importantly their methods, are exposed in the light of day by our new Congress, it will be increasingly difficult for the Republicans on the Hill to provide cover. The problems now, of course, are the roadblocks. Government shutdown, Cohen delays, any efforts for crusading progressives to reach the top of the ladder are continually derailed as Donkey Kong throws more barrels at them. But we're going to get there, and it will be sometime this year. And whether Trump is indicted, impeached, resigns, or absconds to Eurasia, it's not necessarily as important what happens next in government. It's all uncharted territory. What is worrisome is how the base, how the rank-and-file Trumpers react. While they're far from the majority in this country, there is about to be a sizable block of people who are about to be on the wrong side of history. It was great American philosopher Kareem Abdul-Jabbar who once said, "It's easier to jump out of a plane, hopefully with a parachute, than it is to change your mind about an opinion." So how do we deal with so many who are so wrong and so incapable of realization? Fortunately, or unfortunately, in the relatively brief history of this nation, we have a lot of experience fighting with ourselves and then welcoming back the renegades, dissidents, rebels, the disgrace, and the deplorable. This practice dates back to the aftermath of our very first battle, the Revolutionary War. The Loyalists, the Tories, were allowed to remain in the colonies and to repatriate in Canada, thus forging a network that almost obliterated our fledgling republic in the War of 1812. A few decades later, our country split sides over the inhumane and cruel practice of slavery. The good guys, or at least the better guys, won the Civil War. But what was the consequence for the faction that fought for evil? Reconstruction failed in the South. The white Southern populace did everything they could to sabotage it, and the federal government didn't have the will to enforce it, trading relative peace for real justice. So the Confederacy was replaced by a Confederacy Light, a race-based class system that featured segregation and Jim Crow instead of slavery, and an alternative history that highlighted the noble battle for states' rights and the war to end Northern aggression. The war is commemorated in the South to this day by well-manicured statues and Civil War reenactments meant to portray the heroism of the Confederate cause. Our collective failure then to reset the order of right and wrong is what troubles us now, and there are so many more examples. In 1939, 22,000 Americans gathered in Madison Square Garden in New York City and gave Nazi salutes while reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. The stage intermixed swastikas and fascist symbolism with the American flag. A few years later, the Nazis were extinguished in the bloodiest war in world history. You can't even say the word Nazi allegorically in this day and age, since there is no moniker that connotes such evil. But whatever became of those 22,000 Americans that exulted in fascism at the Garden that night, and all those like-minded that didn't attend? Well, they continued to live among us, of course, stoking anti-Semitism and conspiracies about Jewish banks and the Jewish media. Long before the internet was born, Holocaust denial was the most sweeping and pervasive fake news. Then there was Vietnam, which through the lens of history is viewed as a travesty. Navy Lieutenant John Kerry came back from Vietnam and testified in real time about the mess that we'd gotten ourselves into over there. But what did presidential candidate Kerry get for being on the right side of history? A PR offensive that has forever turned the term swiftboat from a noun into a verb. The name Nixon was an epithet, but just 6 years after the Watergate investigation forced a president to resign, there was a Republican back in the White House. And then that president presided over the scandal of Iran-Contra, as the administration played footsie with our enemies in support of a covert war. Yet the Reagan name is rarely sullied, seemingly only when connections are missed at a certain D.C. airport. You see, there are no real winners and losers in our fragile union. Our nation's greatest value isn't morality or justice, it's continued coexistence. Both sides, and all that. Which brings us all back to today, where I started before this rambling zigzag through history. And my original thesis question: what happens to all the millions of Trump supporters after he leaves office in disgrace? What steps can be taken to pass judgment on this chapter of history? Or will history look back whimsically at the quirky phenomenon that propped up a television flim-flam man into the nation's highest office. This country has always fallen into this trap, and all of us are guilty, or at least complicit. The TV producer and me can't wait for our justice system to find Trump guilty of a litany of white-collar crimes and sentence him to a season of Trump community service on primetime network real estate. And as much as I'd revel in episodes with Trump picking up trash after a parade on the National Mall, or doing opioid addiction outreach in the Rust Belt, or tutoring math in Ferguson, Missouri, it would get ratings, but it would just be more TV, tabloid, and Twitter fodder. The nation wouldn't change. The reaction to Trump has to be rebuke, and it has to be multiple. A prosecution for Mueller is only the start. First, there need to be consequences. Nixon never faced charges and Reagan was never impeached. Trump will surely face hundreds of millions in fines and possibly jail time. But what's more important is they make a deal for Trump to shut the hell up. Trump's deal for his freedom needs to be a period of sequestration with no cameras, no Twitter, no hair and makeup. During that time, all his financial records shine under the light of day, and Trump's base gets to see every day how they were played. Then we need cooperation from the other side. Instead of Fox News going down with the ship, maybe they can just adapt. Let me present an analogy, David. I believe we're both from a similar place and a similar time, and even though I don't think we went to summer camp together, I feel like you must know the story of WPLJ. 95.5 FM was the Vanguard classic rock station in New York. Then, unannounced in the summer of 1983, the morning show opened with Michael Jackson's Wanna Be Startin' Something from the Red Hot Thriller album. Classic rock went to top 40 in the snap of a finger. Maybe Fox News can do the same. Without a press release, they could send Hannity and Tucker Carlson on extended vacations, elevate Shepard Smith and Brett Baer into prime time, and do a traditional evening news, only skew it towards older white people. A simple format change, but a ton of good PR at the end of the rainbow. Maybe Rupert Murdoch can win Times Man of the Year in 2019 before his network reverts back to form for the 2020 race without Trump. And finally, we need to end the nostalgia. You know about gun buyback programs? There's got to be a way to get those stupid hats out of circulation. Somebody needs to pay cash money for every red MAGA hat that gets turned in, like $25 or maybe a symbolic $45. Enough incentive for people to actually do it. We'll go and pressure some billionaire to fund it, or maybe just an enterprising podcaster with a platform and a Patreon page. Getting rid of Trump is the one thing, but getting rid of Trumpism is going to be the hard part. If we don't do both, we're just waiting for history to repeat itself.
Oh, crap. Well, that's a good point. All of which are good points, of course. It pays. It doesn't pay a dime to consider all of these things, but we ought to be. These are things that we do have to consider. Not that anyone will compensate us for our time in doing so, but some excellent points and very striking to remind us of. For instance, the prior to our entry into World War II. Madison Square Garden fascist rallies. It's true. Tens of thousands of people, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people, including those who weren't able to to make it to this one particular event, going into, imagine that. This is very interesting. And I wonder if they came out with their minds changed. Does World War work for changing minds and things like that? Or did they simply fight World War II with a grudge, a chip on their shoulder, and say, we really shouldn't have had to do this in the first place. This would have been a lot easier had we joined the Nazis and fought to conquer the rest of the world for fascism instead. Or did they, become enthusiastically nationalist and join the army and turn on a dime, like you suggest Fox News could do, into anti-Nazi proto-fascists? They could still be American fascists, but be anti-German Nazi fascism too. I don't know. Good point. And I wonder if we'd be able to fund the removal of MAGA hats from circulation. All right, well, we're going to switch gears because there's an awful lot to consider here. And being the weekend, I don't know. There's no rules with respect to what we have to go to next. And there's about 15 things I'd like to cram in. And the more I tell you that, the less time I have to cram them in there. So let's see what we can do here. All right. Let me jump over here. Bloomberg News has a piece of some interest to those of you who've been following the show for a little while, Bloomberg Law, responsible for this one. Labor Secretary's role in abuse deal could get DOJ scrutiny. And then it says 2 in parentheses, and I'm not certain what that's supposed to mean. What is that otherwise inscrutable headline? Are you paying attention? Do you remember? Can you call it all back to mind? Do you remember the name of the Labor Secretary? You might not, but if you don't, I'll tell you. It's Alexander Acosta. Now, do you see what we're getting at here? The Justice Department's Inspector General wants lawmakers to give him the authority to investigate a decades-old plea deal in which Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta allegedly allowed an accused sex offender to skirt the harshest punishment for crimes against teens. Yes, that's right. We're thinking of Jeffrey Epstein here. Okay, so credit for the article, by the way, to Chris Opfer and Jacqueline Diaz. They continue by quoting DOJ Inspector General Michael Horowitz in a January 29th letter, and saying, your letter raises important questions about the resolution of this case by the department attorneys. I guess he's actually responding to a letter from lawmakers asking, hey, what about this whole thing? He then continues by saying, however, the OIG does not currently have jurisdiction over matters involving allegations of misconduct relating to DOJ attorneys' handling of litigation or legal decisions. Is that right? What do they do all day? The department's watchdog responded to lawmakers' calls to look into an agreement that Acosta, then a federal prosecutor from South Florida, reached with lawyers for Miami hedge fund manager Jeffrey Epstein, which allowed Epstein to avoid federal sex trafficking charges, even though he's a sex trafficker. So that's kind of weird. Epstein was sentenced to 13 months in prison on lesser charges. Horowitz called on the Senate to take up a bill, H.R. 202, which, of course, would maybe have to be taken up in the House first. Yes, HR. Is this year's HR 202 or last year's HR? It's a new bill. It's the 116th Congress. HR 202, an act to amend the Inspector General Act of 1978. Okay, so it is. Does it say whose bill it is? It ought to, but it doesn't here. Okay, very interesting. Well, it's been referred to the Committee on the Judiciary. We could look it up. And why don't we do that? We'll live look it up on the air at congress.gov, HR 202. Why doesn't it have the sponsor's name on it? That's unusual, I think. Cedric Richmond. Did you think that's where it was coming from? I didn't. Democrat of Louisiana's 2nd District. Any co-sponsors? There are 3. It's introduced on the first day of the session. Stephen Lynch, Elijah Cummings, that's an important help, and Jody Heiss. So, okay, Republican of Georgia from the 10th District. Unusual to see that lineup. Okay, well, let's continue on then, shall we? Where are we? Horowitz called on the Senate to take up Bill H.R. 202, and again, the House ought to also, but I guess he's writing back to senators. That's why he says the Senate should take it up. It was recently passed by the House. I'm sorry. No wonder. That is interesting. How come none of the links had any information on that? Where's the congress.gov entry? Let's see. It's ordinarily, I would have said, there it is. The tracker says passed House. Okay. When? I'm sort of curious how quickly that moved. Let's see. So it was introduced on the 3rd and passed in the House on the 15th. Okay. It even has the time, 1:28 p.m. And then received in the Senate on the 16th and referred to the Committee on Judiciary there. Okay. So that doesn't tell me who he's writing back to at all. I can't infer that. But good advice. Senate, take up the bill H.R. 202. Recently passed in the House. He said that legislation would give him the authority to investigate alleged prosecutorial misconduct. A November Miami Herald report on the Epstein case has renewed public attention to the allegations against Epstein, who was accused of running a teen sex ring out of his Florida home, not even a pizza place. It's also brought new criticism to Acosta, who, as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, is said to have helped orchestrate the agreement. Epstein's all-star legal defense team included Harvard University professor Alan Dershowitz, former special prosecutor Kenneth Starr, ironically enough, and famed criminal defense attorney Roy Black. The Labor Department declined Bloomberg Law's request for comment. A DOL spokeswoman on January 15th told Bloomberg Law that Acosta acted appropriately. Well, that's a surprise. Let's see. By the way, Acosta was rumored to be on a short list of potential replacements for Jeff Sessions before the Herald story was published, so important journalistic work there in avoiding that disaster, although I guess that might have made it easier for the Department Inspector General to do the investigation after all, but I'm not positive about that. Let's see. Anything else here? There's Acosta, in a 2011 letter obtained by the Daily Beast, said he was brought into the case because local police officers were concerned that state prosecutors would let Epstein off easy. So good job there in letting him off easy. He said the deal was reached after Epstein's lawyers launched a year-long assault on the prosecution and the prosecutors that was more aggressive than which I or any of the prosecutors in my office had previously encountered. Syntactically suspect. Honestly, the House on January 15th passed by voice vote, the Inspector General's Access Act, which would move DOJ prosecutor misconduct probes into the Inspector General from the Office of Professional Responsibility. Oh, I don't know if that's a great idea. Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham, whose panel would likely get first crack at the bill, recently joined Senator Ben Sasse in urging Attorney General nominee William Barr to conduct a full and thorough investigation of the Epstein case if confirmed for the post. Graham spokesman didn't respond immediately to Bloomberg Law's request for comment. All right, interesting. Don't know if I'm qualified to comment any further on the question of whether or not the Inspector General or Office of Professional Responsibility ought to be the ones who conduct the investigation. Can't really speak to the benefits of one versus the other. All right. But I wanted to put it out there that Acosta may, have the heat turned up beneath him for that deal, and that would be a good thing if we believe they'll conduct the investigation thoroughly and honestly, and it's a question mark on that point. Okay. Follow up on a mention from Neil, the Ideo Lodge tweeter who frequently tips us off here on the show, who sent us the note the other day about Howard Schultz. Didn't really want to spend any more time on him, but it seemed like a pretty interesting backgrounder. He had mentioned that Schultz lives in a gated waterfront estate in the city of 12, and I'm not clear on this. Gated waterfront estate in the city of 12 houses he moved to after illegally building a driveway through a city park that bordered on a different mansion he owned. So, yeah, he's an everyman. We didn't get to read it on the air, but I saw it shortly after one of the many discussions of Schultz. And I'm not getting how the layout works here, but luckily I have an article that will help clear this up. But when you were saying he lived in a gated waterfront, quote, estate in the city, like in the city of Seattle, or is it in the city of 12 houses he moved to after illegally building it? Did he incorporate a city that has just 12 houses in it? That's possible for evil billionaire geniuses, or I say evil genius, ironically or advisedly, perhaps. Did he build a volcano lair, or does he have an estate that's made up of the land conglomerated from 12 houses that he bought in Seattle? I'm not really sure. My questions presumably will be answered by a piece I grabbed after having seen that tip from Salon, or Salon if you prefer that pronunciation of it. This by Amanda Marcotte, who I guess picked up on the story shortly after Schultz injected himself into our political scene. Oh, I can't read it to you because I have to turn off the various things that pop up in between. I thought AMP was my biggest problem, even when I'm not reading things in AMP format. The number of online publications, the text of which jumps around and moves physically on the screen from one place to another, such that you lose your place when you're reading, is outrageous. The state of the internet is near disaster at this point. Forget about just reading it on your own is trouble enough. Try reading it on the air when the text keeps moving and things keep popping up and covering them up. Well, you've heard me try and do that. Anyway, the story, Amanda Marcotte's version of it here. Howard Schultz built a driveway through a park. This is why he shouldn't be president. I assume that there's probably other reasons too, but this is meant to make you feel better if you had any shame about forcing him or trying to bully him out of the presidential field. The Starbucks CEO's 1994 battle over Seattle Park is a classic story about America's billionaire class. And by the way, if you're looking for good memes on it, what was on TV last night? Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, was on TV last night. And if you recall that one, that was the sequel one, right? Where Dr. Evil does some time travel. They all do some time travel in this one. But at some point in the modern setting, their evil genius lair is in the Seattle, what is that, the Space Needle, and it's got a Starbucks logo all over it. And they've made most of their evil corporation money by having number two in Dr. Evil's absence invest heavily in Starbucks. It's kind of humorous for the times, anyway. Well, it's supposed to be a humorous movie, so he's probably glad I said that. It's light praise, faint praise for Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. Okay, whether or not Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz is sincere about conducting an independent presidential campaign, he isn't. The media blitz he has received makes clear that this particular billionaire has nothing but contempt for the concept of public good, the public good. Consider the way Schultz speaks about politicians who want to ameliorate economic inequality through progressive taxation. He has said they are ridiculous, misinformed, and even un-American for wishing to return to the tax rates of the mid-20th century. Schultz appears to be using the threat of a spoiler campaign in order to intimidate Democrats out of even talking about higher taxes on the rich. But one story out of Seattle from the early 1990s regarding a public park and a private driveway perfectly illustrates the toxic brew of entitlement, contempt for the commons, and overblown self-regard that is fueling Schultz's presidential flirtation. Quite a few of Howard Schultz's neighbors say the Parks Department should never have let him build a 100-foot driveway through the park next to his new home overlooking Lake Washington near Denny Blaine Park, begins a January 3rd, 1994 Seattle Times article written by Dick Lilly. Schultz had purchased a parcel of private property and a peck of pickled peppers as well on a Seattle hilltop that had already had a driveway running through Veretta Park, but that was not enough. Not for him. The coffee magnate wanted more than the existing overgrown lane, as it's set off in scare quotes here. So he got city permission to build a new driveway and even convinced Seattle authorities to waive the $25,000 fee they charged for using the park as a staging area during driveway construction. I briefly paused there in between park and staging area because all the text on the screen shifted once again in the middle of my reading because they needed to accommodate a pop-up ad of a different size in between two of the paragraphs that I've already read, and it should have been off the screen already. Just wanted to let you know what a pain in the ass you really are over there. The advertiser, Comcast Business. So screw you, Comcast, as well as Salon on that front. Okay. So they waived the fee, a $25,000 fee he should have had to pay for using the park as a staging area during the construction of this driveway. Why would they waive that? I don't know. I guess they just waive things for rich people, and that's the real point here. Parks employees apparently expected Schultz to make significant, though unspecified at the time, improvements to the park, Lilly wrote in 1994. The text has moved again. Doesn't matter. It's almost time for us to take our break. Let's get over it. It's really killing me here. Instead, city officials realized that the construction, totaling more than $91,000 worth, was glitzier than the Parks Department thought they had okayed. Very interesting. As a different Seattle Times article published 4 months later explains. So once again, pulling the wool over city officials' eyes by saying you're going to do one thing and doing whatever the hell you feel like later. Park employees discovered that Schultz had built a wall, and a planting area that extended into park land. It wasn't even his land. He just built on it because he thought it would look nice. And I guess they let him get away with it because he's rich and they like coffee. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air. And now that's down to about 1 in 15. But we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now that's not all on you, but remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with Amanda Marcotte's version of the story of Howard Schultz and his famous driveway across the park in Seattle. I would love to continue with where I was reading, but where I was reading has just moved for the 15th time. So let's see. Where do we leave off? Here we are. Park employees discovered that Schultz had built a wall and a planting area that extended into park land. And Schultz had far overstepped any approvals for a driveway. Residents complained that the park was no longer usable for public recreation, its intended purpose, in case you were wondering what parks are about. City officials reportedly had great difficulty even getting Schultz's lawyers to respond to their requests that he scale back his construction to meet the terms of their original agreement. The way in which the property is landscaped makes Upper Veretta Park appear to be part of Mr. Schultz's land. John Capps, then president of a neighborhood group called the Madrona Community Council, said in a letter to the Parks Department. You can see how that might happen. You have land alongside a beautiful park, and you realize, of course, it will remain beautiful and open adjacent to your property because it's a park, but you just wish that it had maybe a nice stone wall alongside your driveway, either for privacy or whatever. Planters here and there, so it would look better out your window. You don't have the right to build them there, but who's going to stop you? After all, you'll just send your lawyers there to say, I'm improving things. If anything, this is a park and I put planters in it. Who's against that, right? Anyway, as these things do, this dispute ended up in years of lawsuits before Schultz, having remade the park to suit his interests, abruptly moved to another part of town. So that's nice. Do the damage and then take off. It's a small story in the scheme of things, and one echoed many times over in encounters between local governments and wealthy individuals, but illustrates why many in Seattle, and that's, I guess, where this feeling is strongest. Oh, the whole shift is going to happen again. Here we go. Looking for the text where we were. Okay. A small story of this in the scheme of things, right? Echoed many times over local governments and other wealthy individuals. But it illustrates why many in Seattle see Schultz as an imperious figure who believes that his wealth and success entitles him to behave like an entitled nobleman who is owed fealty by the rest of the city. The most prominent example, of course, is Schultz's 2006 sale of the Seattle Supersonics that Joan mentioned yesterday, or 2 days ago, the city's fiercely loved basketball team, in a fit of pique when taxpayers refused to pay for massive renovations of Key Arena or build him a new arena. Familiar story there, too. The new owners moved the Sonics out of town in 2008. They are now the Oklahoma City Thunder. Schultz writes in his new book that he, quote, will forever be deeply sorry for the Sonics fiasco, but in truth, he's not apologizing at all. Instead, he's sorry that he miscalculated in believing that he could use the threat of moving the team to strong-arm the city into giving him massive sums of money for a new arena. My assumptions were a mistake, Schultz writes. That's consistent. Seattle columnist Joel Connolly unloaded on the Starbucks tycoon on Monday, chronicling the loathing many Seattle residents feel towards Schultz for his nonstop whining about the lease on Key Arena. I didn't think my opinion of Howard Schultz could get any lower after he stabbed our entire community in the back and sold the Sonics, but I guess he could stab the entire country in the back, Derek Richards, head of the King County Young Democrats, is quoted as saying. People who aren't sports fans may not understand this, but the loss of the Sonics came as a major blow to a city that has undergone massive changes over the past few decades. To get a taste of how bitter people were after the fact, check out this concert rant from Soundgarden's Chris Cornell in 2011, 3 years after the Sonics departed for Oklahoma City. We will not check that out, but you can. The quote, I guess the relevant one here, they took our expletive team from us. Since I was this high, I had that team, and I guess he means stature, as opposed to how high he was right then. And they expletive took it away. He complained, and here's an expletive they left in, it's BS, to take away a basketball team. That is, I mean, it's an issue for the community. I don't know if that's such a super serious complaint, the way Cornell puts it here. But okay. Schultz's behavior towards Seattle illustrates the attitude that is also fueling his presidential ambitions, a belief that everyone else should kowtow to the billionaires and that they owe nothing to their communities. This is also clearly reflected in Schultz's meager charitable giving, which amounts to less than 0.5% of his $3.4 billion fortune. It's reflected in Schultz's history of union busting at Starbucks and his support of a lobbying campaign against raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Like many of America's much-touted billionaires, including the one who somehow wound up in the White House, Schultz likes to describe himself as self-made. This sort of rhetoric is normalized and mundane in the U.S., but it should be treated as the ridiculous joke that it is. Schultz would be nowhere without the thousands of people who actually do the work every day of running Starbucks. The baristas, the construction workers, the coffee growers, the shipping employees, the office dwellers who run everything from customizing the holiday-specific drinks and design elements that shape the brand. Schultz, like every other successful capitalist, built his wealth on other people's labor and the support of communities like Seattle, which offer him roads and other infrastructure to operate his business with, and also bought his coffee long before it became a global lifestyle brand. His response to all his home city's help and support was to sell Seattle's basketball team and build a driveway through a city park. Honestly, Amanda concludes here, I'm glad Schultz is doing this media blitz and threatening to run for president. He may think he's working to defend the low taxes and substandard regulatory structures that have allowed economic inequality to flourish, but he's not. Oh, shoot, I'm glad he's not. On the contrary, every day his smug, entitled face is visible on people's screens. He makes the case for taxing people like him until they're brought down a peg, maybe a billion pegs. He's a one-man showcase for why it's immoral to have billionaires at all, referring to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who we had managed to avoid mentioning at all so far this day, but deserves kudos for bringing that one into the lexicon. Okay, a couple more things to get to here. Which ones do we want to include? Here's a quick hit, I thought. Good point. Very often things well said by our friend LOLGOP, said succinctly and in a tweet. Good point here. And this, a follow-up on the follow-up that we didn't use to follow up on the story, the continuing saga of Trump golf course employees who are undocumented. That was a big story, a month and a half ago, when they first developed the story of the undocumented immigrants working at his Bedminster, New Jersey golf club, including the housekeepers who took care of his personal property there, his home on the Bedminster course. and how trusted they were with that task, and how they were hidden from the Secret Service when the Secret Service came around, or how people at the Bedminster operation covered for their lack of documentation, which they knew to be the case. In other words, it was a story of Donald Trump was actually, satisfied with the standard of work that they were doing. And he was very happy with the way they were keeping up his home. And so he was perfectly willing to ignore that they were undocumented, which is actually a good thing to do, except for the fact, of course, that he's exploiting the issue elsewhere and destroying other people's lives. Well, he finally did get around to destroying their lives too. And in the last week or so, the Trump organization has made a big show of now going around and finding those people and firing them. And so a big follow-up story from a number of outlets about those people now losing their jobs at these Trump golf courses. And I think a lot of us had sort of mixed feelings about it, although we absolutely mostly felt sorry for the people who were being victimized in all this. We probably also had thoughts in the back of our mind somewhere, and we tried to suppress them because it wasn't really fair to the actual economic situation that these people found themselves in. But just wondering, what did you think was going to happen here? You know who he is. You know what he's campaigning on. You know what he's doing to others. And you were holding on to this job as long as you could. But, you need to feed your family. So it's not like you really had any flexibility to stand on moral principle here. But still, you do wonder, was there ever a time in which you thought it wouldn't happen to you because you knew him personally? I'm just kind of curious. Anyway, the big story really, though, is they're firing people all over the place for this, and have just now said, oh, well, we'll begin using the E-Verify system at all the Trump Organization properties to make sure that all our employees have valid working papers, are here legally, and can legally hold this job. They were supposed to be doing that before. It's not mandatory using E-Verify, but for somebody who makes such a big deal out of illegal immigrants coming to this country and stealing jobs from Americans, to not take any responsibility at all for being the person who awards those jobs to undocumented immigrants as opposed to Americans, then you're not supposed to have a leg to stand on. But this is Trump, and this is Trump world, and LOL YOLO, nothing matters. Anyway, as LOL GOP finally, to get back to the tweet here, puts it, it's astounding, of course, but here we are. So they now are announcing, the Trump Organization, they're going to use E-Verify at all properties to check employees' legal status. And it's summed up thus by LOL GOP. Trump believes undocumented immigration is such an emergency, right? Where are we? He's about to declare a national emergency situation to do something about it at the border. He believes undocumented immigration is such an emergency that he stopped hiring undocumented workers, check story, yesterday. That's the national emergency. That's not going to do well when and if the courts get to decide on the validity of the national emergency. Such an emergency that you were hiring undocumented immigrants up until just the other day, until you got busted in a newspaper, and only then did you care? It can't really be much of an emergency then, can it? It's certainly hard to see things that way and not laugh until you vomit in your own mouth. All right. Anyway, didn't mean to ruin your breakfast with that phrase. Okay, let's see. There's a couple other things here, all of which are ridiculous and or of some amazing interest here. Let's grab this one, a trending article according to Pocket, and so therefore well worth your time, and you'll feel up to date on things. I bet I'm looking at an AMP version. I am, but to hell with it. Didn't do me any good to switch out of AMP before. The Guardian has this piece. The headline should tell you all you need to know, but I'm going to elaborate anyway, because Sam Levin, who wrote the story, did elaborate, and we should honor the fact that it goes beyond the headline. Revealed, FBI investigated civil rights group as terrorism threat and viewed KKK as victims. Now, you like to be even-handed in the government and consider both sides, even though both sidesism can lead you astray. But maybe this was a mistake. Bureau spied on California activists, citing potential conspiracy against the rights of neo-Nazis. How do you like that? The FBI opened a domestic terrorism investigation into a civil rights group in California, labeling the activists extremists after they protested against neo-Nazis in 2016, new documents reveal. New documents, new case, but same old, same old. Federal authorities ran a surveillance operation on By Any Means Necessary, or BAMN. Do they really go by that? Spying on the leftist group's movements in an inquiry that came after one of BAMN's member was stabbed at the white supremacist rally, according to documents obtained by The Guardian. The FBI's BAMN files reveal the FBI investigated them for potential conspiracy against the rights of the Ku Klux Klan and white supremacists. The FBI considered the KKK as victims and the leftist protesters as potential terror threats, and downplayed the threats of the Klan, writing the KKK consisted of members that some perceived to be supportive of a white supremacist agenda, you think? The FBI's monitoring included in-person surveillance, and the agency cited BAMN's advocacy against rape and sexual assault and police brutality as evidence of the terrorism inquiry. Really, it's good evidence. The FBI's 46-page report on BAMN, obtained by the government transparency nonprofit Property of the People through a records request, presented an astonishing description of the KKK, said Mike German, a former FBI agent and far-right expert who reviewed the documents for The Guardian. The report ignored 100 years of Klan terrorism that has killed thousands of Americans and continues using violence right up to the present day, German said. This description of the KKK should be an embarrassment to the FBI leadership, if they're capable of that. Shanta Driver, BAMN's national chair, criticized the investigation in a statement to The Guardian, saying the FBI's interest in BAMN is part of a long-standing policy, starting with their campaign to persecute and slander Dr. Martin Luther King. They have a racist history of targeting peaceful civil rights and anti-racist organizations while doing nothing to prosecute the racists and fascists who attacked Dr. King and the movement he built. Yeah, pretty much the case. I am going to stop with the reading here and recommend that you take a look at it on your own. It's rather lengthy, and I know it's making some excellent points. I want to see if we can do a quick roundup of other things, perhaps, that you ought to be reading during the weekend and at least ought to be aware of. Here is a piece that I grabbed from the Daily Kos Diary of D'Artagnan, who writes up this story. I think this is an important one to keep an eye on, too, though not my usual domain because of the environmental concerns that are at the heart of the story. The legal issues are going to come back again and again. Trump's Energy Department secretly ships truckload of plutonium, yikes, to Nevada, ignoring a federal judge. If you don't care about plutonium or the rest of the environment poisoned by it, how about the federal judge issue? Without notifying the citizens or any state officials, and in the face of long-standing public resistance that prompted a federal court filing, Donald Trump's Department of Energy secretly shipped 0.5 metric ton of radioactive plutonium from South Carolina to a site in Nevada. That, according to a report in Yahoo News, the link provided here. I'm just going to take a quick scan through their version of it, but let's continue with D'Artagnan's reading of it. This is a clip from that article. The U.S. Department of Energy revealed on Wednesday that it secretly shipped weapons-grade plutonium from South Carolina to a nuclear security site in Nevada months ago, despite the state's protests. But it's more than just the state's protests that are at issue here. The transport of plutonium is, by definition, an extremely high-risk endeavor. Nevada argued that the Department of Energy failed to consider potential dangers of moving the poisonous radioactive material through densely populated areas, such as Las Vegas, to a potentially unstable site susceptible to flash floods and earthquakes. Doesn't sound like an ideal spot, does it? The state had requested that the truck-borne shipment be blocked in November of last year and sought an injunction on the planned move in U.S. District Court. As of January, the court had yet to rule on the injunction, and officials from the state were negotiating with the Department of Energy. It now appears that the negotiations were, as Nevada's Democratic Governor Steve Sisolak, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, put it, a total sham on the part of Trump's Department of Energy. And it isn't as if officials were unaware of their deception. Although the DOE has refused to disclose exactly when the plutonium was shipped or the route taken, it was clearly a fait accompli, even as the state's lawsuit was still pending. In fact, before the suit was even filed, DOE officials were admonished by Judge Miranda Du, DU, not to act before her ruling. And they didn't bother to inform the court that, in fact, the plutonium had already been shipped. Amazing. And a clip here in January, Du declined to immediately block the plutonium and indicated she wouldn't rule until February, which is now. I hope the government doesn't ship plutonium pending a ruling by this court, she said at the time. And now, I mean, is that ironic? What is she? Wink, wink, I hope you don't do it. Or is she serious? I don't know. It's hard to tell just from this written bit. I mean, given the fact that they went ahead and shipped it. But that's just seemed like an astonishing point to make. That's what you're up against with these guys. You say, look, I'm going to make my ruling and I won't enjoin you pending the ruling, but that's only because I trust that you as the United States government won't be childlike and childish, I guess, and impetuous and try and ship this stuff before I rule on the question. And now you have your answer. Yes, they will. The governor and the state senates and congressional delegations are, in a word, furious. More clips from the article. Nevada Governor Steve Sisolak, I hope, says he's beyond outraged by this completely unacceptable deception. That and $5 will get you a cup of coffee at Schultz's place. He announced a hastily called news conference in Carson City late Wednesday. The state is now seeking another court order to block any more shipments of plutonium as it pursues any and all legal remedies, including contempt of court orders against the federal government. It's not going to move the plutonium, though. Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen called the government's move a both deceitful and unethical. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, also a Nevada Democrat, said she would demand department officials come to her office on Thursday to explain how they made the reckless decision in such bad faith. Once again, this is a good point. It appears that lying and endangering U.S. citizens are things that just go with the territory in Trump's administration. A good warning. Thanks, D'Artagnan, for writing that one up. Not usually on our radar, but absolutely belongs there because of the threat to, like the rule of law and stuff like that. Let's see. A couple of other directions we could go in, and because we have a Daily Kos source on this one, we'll bring you up to date on that one too. Carrie Eleveld writing up the Trump administration deal lifting sanctions on Russian oligarch, riddled with conflicts of interest. And they are, of course, all over the place. This one illustrated with a picture of Steve Mnuchin, the other walking conflict of interest. Democrats have barely begun to dig into the Trump administration's move to lift sanctions on Russian oligarch and Vladimir Putin ally Oleg Deripaska, but it already stinks. First, Democrats want to know why a billionaire Republican donor with alleged business ties to Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin also happens to be a major investor in the behemoth aluminum company Rusal, which is owned by Deripaska. We're seeking an explanation as to how you managed your own potential conflicts of interest arising from your personal and professional relationships with major Rusal shareholder Len Blavatnik. Remember him? We've called his name before. A key beneficiary from your decision to delist Rusal, wrote Democratic Representative Elijah Cummings and Senator Ron Wyden, who chair the committees of jurisdiction on the issue. Last month, Mnuchin abruptly announced Treasury would lift the sanctions it had first imposed on Deripaska and his companies last April for engaging in malign activities. When Mnuchin briefed, and that's in scare quotes, congressional members on the decision earlier this month, Nancy Pelosi shredded the briefing as stiff competition for one of the worst classified briefings we have received from the Trump administration. The Treasury Department also misrepresented the deal from the outset, initially suggesting Deripaska would have to fully sever his control of the sanctioned companies. In fact, he and his allies retained a majority ownership of the parent company that owns Rusal, EN+, while being freed from hundreds of millions in debt. In other words, the deal was a boon to Deripaska. But Mnuchin's alleged conflicts of interest aren't the only red flag. Among the new board members EN Plus announced Monday is Christopher Burnham, a member of Trump's transition team and former Deutsche Bank executive. Remember Deutsche Bank? It's the financial institution that lent Trump hundreds of millions of dollars after American banks had been scared off by his crushing debt load. Deutsche Bank also just became the subject of a congressional inquiry by House Democrats. Salon reports that when EN Plus announced the addition of Burnham, the company cited his work in the Bush administration and at Deutsche Bank, but somehow left out his position on the Trump transition team. Oh, no, what a terrible mistake that must have been. Mitch McConnell also apparently implicated in all of this. This also reported days ago by folks at the Daily Kos community. In this case, a diary from Leslie Salzillo. Mitch McConnell reportedly linked to Putin, Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, and Russian companies. Let's take a quick look at that one. There's always something more to a story when it involves Donald Trump and Russia. And this time that more involves Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Earlier today, that would have been, Monday. All the way back on Monday. We heard that the U.S. lifted some Russian sanctions. The official announcement came on Sunday. Mnuchin lifted sanctions on 3 Russian companies tied to Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, close ally of Putin. Deripaska is also a business partner with Paul Manafort. Business partner is kind of a weird term for that, but okay. You know who Manafort was. And let's take a quick look here. On January 16th, Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer led a resolution to stop Mnuchin from lifting the Russian sanctions. And although 11 Republican Senate members joined in support, the Democratic lawmakers still didn't have enough votes. Bernie Sanders, an independent, as you know, chose not to be there to vote. And who knows? I don't know where he was. Don't mean to get into that. But if he didn't vote, he didn't vote. With the ongoing Mueller-Trump-Russia collusion investigation running strong, even the supporting Republicans saw Mnuchin's concessions to Russia as a bad move at the time. House members led by Majority Leader Steny Hoyer also tried to stop Mnuchin, introducing a similar resolution on the 17th. But the Democratic House members were also unable to overpower Trump's position and Mitch McConnell's Senate majority. Both Democratic attempts were considered to be symbolic. Monday evening brought a new twist. Then was later discovered that one of Mitch McConnell's major donors, Len Blavatnik, same name here, tied to Vladimir Putin and other oligarchs, benefited when Trump and McConnell lifted Russian sanctions on Sunday. An earlier Dallas News piece titled How Putin Oligarchs Funneled Millions into GOP Campaigns is one of the best pieces you'll read on the subject. And here are a couple of excerpts, just to let you know who's Blavatnik giving money to. A total of $3.5 million to a PAC associated with McConnell. Another $1.5 million to the GOP Senate Leadership Fund PAC in the name of Access Industries. Another $1 million in the name of AI or AL, I'm not certain. Altep Holdings during the 2015-16 election season. And as of September 2017, another $1 million through that same company. Blavatnik, whose family emigrated to the United States in the late 1970s, is a longtime business associate of Oleg Deripaska, Victor Vekselberg as well, both of whom have ties to Putin. Along with McConnell, Republican Senators Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham received hefty sums from Blavatnik as well. A little bit tougher to crack down on the Blavatnik stuff, of course, because he's an American citizen. But it is interesting how lines are blurred, both as between the officialdom of Russian government and its mafia rulers, and as between ostensibly American citizens and that same ruling mafia capo system as personified by the oligarchs. I mean, I guess you can still have personal ties there. There's still a lot more that I wanted to get to. I think we got a few more licks in there by the end of the show than I thought we were going to be able to. Maybe next week we can come back to the questions of filibuster reform, since that is now in the offing once again. More on developments in the emoluments cases, and who knows what nonsense we'll have to look at after the next wild weekend at Perva-Lago is finished with. In the meantime, do stay tuned for Justice Putnam to bring you up to date at the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. He's got, as usual, a raft of stories, some of which we've already discussed here, and some of which will be entirely new to you. Stay tuned.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Hottest subject of the day that we missed. Whistleblower Tricia Newbold was suspended less than a week after reports that Jared Kushner's top-secret security clearance was approved over staff objections. A former IBM executive said she was ordered not to comply with the federal agency's request that the company disclose names of over 50 who'd been laid off, and much more.